Welcome to episode 557 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and we had a change of plans this week. Instead of sharing the wonderful collaboration that I've been working on and teased earlier last week, instead, I brought on my collaborator in that project, Rob from the popular YouTube channel, Robby Lou, for some regular Barca chatter because there was too much news. I knew midweek that we would have a little bit of rumors and all that stuff, but there was just too much chatter this week. And we have that big project that we're working on, but we want to take a few more minutes to breathe with it, moments to kind of sit with it and work on it. Because as I was working on it, I did realize that the Champions League is also less than a week away. So there are other things to keep our focus and our attention on in the short term. So first and foremost, though, welcome to the show. Rob, how's it going?
Thank you, Dan. No, I'm happy to be here. I've been a listener of the pod for probably like 3 years, and so I'm happy to contribute to the team.
Well, in 3 years, then, you have definitely heard me talk about Frenkie de Jong exhaustively, and that's what we're going to do today, because that is our big topic, Frenkie de Jong, because whether this is real or not, there's always some truth to it. We know that. It's the same story for the last 3 seasons, and again, I wanted to bring on a new voice because people have heard this from me too many times already. The last 3 seasons, there comes that moment, or multiple moments in every year, when Barca puts pressure on Frenkie de Jong through the media and probably internally as well to either renew or they want to sell him before he can leave as a free agent in 2026. And Barca owes him a lot of money until then, somewhere in the ballpark of, I will try to say this slowly and maybe even whisper for those who don't want to hear it, 112,500 million. That's not 112,500 euros. That's 112,500 euros. Million. Sorry, million euros. And that is a lot of money. Someone said I can't even get it out. In 2 seasons, he will be 23.5% of the total payroll on the wage books. And Lewandowski, by the way, will be a total of 17% of the total payroll. After this season, in totality, Barca will still owe Frenkie de Jong 77 million euros until the summer of 2026. And just throwing it out there, by the way, that this club still owes Lewandowski about 81 million euros. And we know there is, I believe, a team option, though, for that final year. And there are certain numbers that he has to hit, or else that last year is not necessarily happening. But anyway, on that contract till 2026, if you were to hit all those metrics, it's 81 million. Koundé is at 54 million until 2027. Rafinha is 50 million owed until 2027. And rounding out the top five is Ferran Torres at 40 million owed until 2027. So De Jong, Lewandowski, Koundé, Rafinha, Ferran Torres, those are the top five that Barca owes until 2026 and in 2027. Now, money is a boring thing, but that is what this is actually always about. But the problem, as we talk about this Frenkie de Jong situation, Rob, is that it has not changed. And Barca will continue to have issues as long as all those numbers are on the wages. Even with the socios still owning FC Barcelona and no super rich American or Saudi or Qatari or whatever owner saving the club, Barca still, with the income reports that came out, they still did really well in terms of income last season. As I keep saying, the problem isn't the financial health of the club. Barcelona is fine. It's that the wages of the squad are too much for FFP when taking into account the losses that the club is still dealing with in regards to COVID and the outsized contracts that were signed pre-COVID. The move to Montjuic has also hurt gate revenue. I've talked about that extensively as well. And the new wages that are now owed the players who those levers were pulled for. So not even necessarily lost income on the levers, but it's about the fact that Koundé, Rafinha, Lewandowski, those levers were pulled, and now those players are to be owed. But as long as those wages are on the books, Barcelona will continue to be in, as Rory Barlow said 2 weeks ago on the show, the risky, virtuous cycle where success was supposed to save the club, and that success has not come. As I said, the money side of things, which is what this is actually all about. But Robbie, for posterity's sake, okay, we'll have a little bit of fun with it. Let's talk about why Barca would or wouldn't want to do this based on the player on the field. Okay, so Barcelona knows that Frenkie de Jong is a core part of their success. He's one of the captains, but even numbers aside, Rob, how do you feel about that move?
I have recently shifted my opinion. I think I've been a profoundly positive voice, or I've tried to be around Frenkie for a long time, because of what he brings at times when he can be in the position that he's best at is unparalleled in world football for most of it. But it has reached the point where we can't afford to be paying him as much as he is earning. He doesn't deliver us 37.5 million euros per year in quality. And that is become apparent to us, especially without this pivot position being solved and with money continuously being allocated to other places. It's beginning to really look poorly on Frenkie, because he just clearly is not helping us win games enough to justify earning that much money. I made a video about it in September or November, talking about how when he got injured this season, the team really struggled to move the ball through the middle of the park. And that's what he's great at. When he has the freedom of a defensive midfielder to cover for him, he can run with the ball like really nobody else can in world football. He's incredible when he can do that. But, and I said, if he did do that and he helped the club win a Champions League or compete in the Champions League and win La Liga or be right up there the entire season, he could make himself worth it, because I don't know how good this team would be without him. But now we're seeing right now that the team is still really struggling with him. And whether that is or is not because he's playing out of position or he has to cover for space that he shouldn't have to, or ideally wouldn't have to. With him in this position, he is playing the way he is, with the club playing the way it is. He is not, we should never be paying someone that much money. He's the second highest earner in world football, or in the top 5 leagues. And with the way Barcelona is playing, we shouldn't be paying the second highest wages to someone in world football, especially someone who needs another player to be unlocked.
Well, to that point about defensive midfield, I would argue that what we saw with him, with Christensen next to him, that is his natural position, with an actual defensive midfielder with him. That's why I thought we saw the best of him last season next to Busquets, when they finally figured that out after 3.5, 4 years. It took a while. And I really would love to see him next to a top defensive midfielder. But the irony is that Barca can't afford one of those with him on the wages. It's not tenable for the wage bill to support those two together. And over the summer, I was pretty devout in saying, when talking about the midfield, that Barcelona is totally different without Pedri above all other players. And the numbers did prove it between last year and the year before. And then this season, though, the team suffered, as you mentioned, with both De Jong and Pedri out, and is now suffering in a different way without Gavi. But the tide has shifted somewhat on terms of the Pedri conversation, with Gundogan picking up those 10 assists and taking some of the weight off of Pedri and what is expected of him offensively. So I think the argument has shifted, and I'm willing to move myself with that, has shifted as to whether Gavi or De Jong is the most essential player to Barcelona, playing even reasonably okay or not, and that their total level completely drops off without one of the two. And it's not an individual game, so there is no way to quantify the impact of just one player, but you get the point that I'm saying here, that there is a new argument as to whether or not Gavi or De Jong is more essential. And I think there is very much an argument to be made that a midfield trio, or even if whoever it is, I know it's not going to be Xavi with his box 4 midfielder, but even if they wanted to play 4 midfielders, that the idea of Gavi, Pedri, Gundogan, and an actual defensive midfielder, a pivot, I'm going to get to him in a second here, but we're going to hypothetically say, De Jong's is sold for 100 million euros, and then that means Barcelona are able to go out. They pay this, 70 million, or it might have gone up, but anyway, let's jump into it quickly here with Martin Zubimendi, because I'll repeat this later. But let's say they don't make the Champions League places, that being Real Sociedad, which they might, but they also might not, because their run of form recently has been pretty terrible. So they miss out on Champions League football. I think it's gettable. Again, we say De Jong says, all right, fine, you push me out. I want to go 100 million euros, and they're still going to pay some of his salary, those deferred payments and all that stuff. Sure. But 100 million euros, then they get Zubimendi. I think there's a very fair argument that either 3 of Gundogan, Pedri, and Zubimendi, or Gavi, when he gets back and healthy, Pedri and Zubimendi with Gundogan, who knows, he's 32, will be 33 next year, so maybe he rotates in a bit more. But whether 3 or 4 of those midfielders with Zubimendi at the base of that pivot, that might be preferable, and that might have a lot more balance than any midfield with De Jong alongside Pedri and Gavi. There is this fear, really, that I think back to last season, that Villarreal match where it was 4-0 in, was it December of last season, so 2022, that was the one and only time when I remember writing in my notes, 10 of 10, De Jong, Gavi, Pedri, this was perfection against a leaky Villarreal side in transition with a lot of space. But if a team isn't playing exactly that way, I don't think we've seen a 10 of 10 performance from that trio together. And again, Gundogan has come in and become somebody that Xavi can't take out. But you get the point that in the long run, even Gundogan is obviously not the answer. He's going to be 33. So the long-term future of your midfield, other than whoever's coming from La Masia, is, I think, an actual top-level pivot and probably not Frenkie de Jong.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think with the way it was nice to see him playing a little bit more freely in the past 2 games with Christensen there. I think we have seen a better Frankie because I think leading up to Christensen being tried as CDM, I think he looked very poor. But I think what you said without Frankie, what he is good at can be replaced by Pedri and Gavi. Maybe not perfectly, but what Pedri and Gavi can do can cover that. And I think the team is overall going to be better if they have a Martin Zubimendi or an Onana or someone like that covering that defensive position and letting Pedri and Gavi figure out how to cover for where we would lose without Frankie. And having Gundo up top again he's been incredible form lately. So
yeah, it's a weird comparison that I'm making here, but he does remind me a lot of the NBA, and some people hate this, but I like the basketball comparisons. But I think of him in world football as a level of like an Anthony Davis, who I know he won a championship in 2020 in the bubble, but a Paul George or an Anthony Davis, and we're not talking about the injuries because both those guys have been doing it in their career, and Frankie de Jong is generally an Iron Man. He eats up a lot of minutes, and I've said he's really important to that. But when he's playing at this top level that he's one of the best. That you're talking about him again. I'm doing the basketball thing because if we're having an MVP conversation, there's so many times when you'd say, would you rather have this player or Anthony Davis, right? And you go through that at the top of his level, and you're like, well, yeah, Anthony Davis to do this or this or this. And same thing with Paul George, like an ISO score. Like, of course, I take Paul George over this player, this player, this player. And you go through that list, and you wind up saying at the top level, this is what they give you. But Frenkie de Jong, because of I think just like those two as well, that they'll have these 2 months of stretch. You're like, okay, that's the guy. And then the rest of it, you're like, but it's not even inconsistency. It's just that the consistency of being one of the top 5 midfielders in the world isn't there. Right. But then you look at his talent and level. And when you start to list the top 10 to 15 best midfielders, Frankie's probably on that list just because he gets there by being enough of one of the best midfielders. And we know that. We see the eye test and you go, his top level is top 10 to 15. But his consistent level is not top 10 or 15 in the course of a season. And I think that is what's tough about him, because if he made, say, 15 million on the wage bill, his versatility to play center back and the different permutations of substitute patterns, and again, what he is good at, where he may not be the best defender, but the fact that he's able to drop in and what he provides you in transition and all those different things that we know that he can really excel at. As far as midfield dribblers in space and pacing a game in the Liga, he's one of the top 2-3 at that skill. But again, we're talking about ball winning, which is never going to be his thing. And it may be something he can improve upon, but we've seen that at this point in the game, he needs somebody next to him to really just be a ball winner. And again, now you're making some of what he does redundant by Pedri and Gabi, and then same thing with the pivot in positioning. So again, if he's 15 million, between his versatility and his abilities, and again, the top level we know he's capable at, you keep him. You keep him around. 15 million would be great, but that's not the case. And what's interesting is who Barcelona is replacing him with is where the real worry comes in with this conversation, though, because again, this is not against Frenkie de Jong. This is against 37.5 million euros. That is always what I'm arguing against. This is not personal about Frenkie de Jong. I was so excited when he came to the club. I would love to have him in the club if he was somehow able to reduce his wages. I don't know if it'd be smart for the club to say, hey, all right, we're going to stretch your contract out to 2032 and we're going to put you on, 10 million or 12 million or whatever. And we're going to ease that out, because when you mentioned the 3 names this week, Amadou Onana, the 22-year-old from Everton, to me, of what I've seen, his ball playing ability and in transition, I don't think it would be a perfect fit at Barcelona or in the Liga. And especially at that EPL price point, I think it's just a bit too much. Dion Lopy, 22-year-old who plays for Almeria, 40 million euro release clause that would go down with Almeria relegated, sure. But I mean, very much like Oriol Romeu. I know he's young, 22, he could get better, but that seems like a stopgap to me when I look at, again, even Marc Bernal will say, all right, are you going to get another stopgap and then hope that La Masia kid is the kid in 2 to 3 years? Sure. And then Alexia Garcia, who it isn't a perfect fit. And we've seen when Real Madrid completely overwhelmed Girona that if you didn't have a perfect fit there, Alexia Garcia at 20 million euro lease clause that might be lowered with Eric Garcia, Pablo Torre, or Romeu returning the other way. Sure, if you get him for 15 million, and you get him for 12, then in theory he's replacing Frenkie de Jong. Yes, but then you still need a defensive midfielder. Like I don't think Alexia Garcia actually solves that problem. So maybe just put that 20 mil or whatever you're going to pay him, and you throw that on top of the transfer fee for a defensive midfielder, and then you just try to get the job done for that pivot. Yeah, I mean, unless the club really does. Again, he's 16. I think he has sky high potential. But again, this Marc Bernal kid, 16 years old, he is really, we're talking 3 years away from reaching the level that Barca will need him to be at for the success that they're looking for to compete, right? Like if anyone else, again, by that time, Pedri will be his mid-20s, hopefully healthy.
Right.
Gabi will be his mid-20s, hopefully healthy. Lamine Yamal will still only be 19. He's 16 too, so he'll only be 19. But, I think Barcelona could be competing in a world where Lamine Yamal is 19, Marc Bernal is 19, everyone else is kind of in their early to mid-20s, and then you've got other experience elsewhere. I mean, again, Ronald Araujo at that point will be 27-ish, right? I think that kind of squad can compete, but you can't compete with Marc Bernal at 17 next year or even potentially 18 the year after. So I think Barcelona still do need a top-level defensive midfielder in the interim, but they do need a guy of high quality, so Barcelona can compete. They have to compete, and they need that guy to compete.
Yeah, I don't think, especially Garcia, I got excited about him when they first talked about him, but I really didn't know anything about him. Just that he played somewhere near the defensive midfield for Girona and they were playing well. But I see him more as a very like for like comparison to Frenkie. He doesn't solve the problems that are left without him, and he's just a worst version of Frenkie de Jong. And that's okay to get if we are getting I don't know, someone like Onana or something, where we need someone who can play the ball next to him and do that and facilitate that and maybe take time away in that position from if they're going to try Gavi there, if they're going to play Pedri deeper, whoever's going to play there, sharing that time with Garcia might be okay. But he isn't that guy. And so I don't know what that leaves us with, maybe Zubamendi, but I see Frenkie right now in this squad as I took economics in school. He's a luxury good, right? When we can afford an expensive, nice thing, he is an expensive, nice thing to have in our team, right? When we have other expensive, nice things around him that let him be what he is expensive and nice for. But right now we need someone who just can, be that whatever destroyer or play that position more solidly than Frenkie is. And so I'm firmly with Frenkie needs to go. I don't think keeping him, even if spreading his wages, like you said, I don't know if that's the solution. I don't think it is.
Unfortunately, there's almost a redundant conversation because, in talking more about Zubamendi, I keep saying that name. But as I said, if they make Champions League again, they got to the knockouts this season, and he and that Real Sociedad project, if he wants to stay, he's going to stay. He's not going anywhere. Right. And Zubamendi just extended his contract as well to give Real Sociedad a major payday. So I think unless an EPL club is coming in for a huge number, or again, Real Sociedad missed the Champions League for next season, that's the only way Zubamendi's leaving. And De Jong is the same way. If that guy doesn't want to leave, there is no club in world football that's going to match his wages. And if I said it last week, I'll say it again. He just had a baby. Like him and his partner just had a baby in Barcelona. Why would you want to raise your kid in any other city in Europe? Why would you want to leave? He's established a family there. He's technically, we'll say, grown up there. I mean, you're in your early 20s, so you know it, that like it's the formative time and you get connected to an area and it's difficult to want to leave after that. It is tough. So, I also saw this week, because it's midweek stuff, outrageous stuff, Rafael Leao, and that's be my question to go back to Zubamendi in the pivot position. You can't talk about Leao, then why not, again, Zubamendi? If Barcelona has 150 million euros to spend, then you break that up and you bring in some kind of other winger, or on the left side, and then you bring in Zubamendi or pay whatever Real Sociedad are asking, because maybe they'll do business with Barcelona, and he will be so much more expensive than Zubamendi too. I mean, AC Milan is asking 150 million euros to start. What are we even talking about with that rumor?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't think he's worth anywhere near that right now. Every time I watch him, is very streaky. Sometimes he looks incredible and he can be that, spark to change a game, but a lot of times he isn't. And if we're spending that kind of money, I just get infuriated when I see things like this, because more and more I just feel like Laporta is just not doing what he needs to do. He's making the wrong decisions, similar way to how I felt with Joao Felix coming this summer. Xavi didn't want him, and he's the coach, he's the manager. Shouldn't he tell you what he wants, and you should listen to him? Laporta chose a different direction, and I'm worried that will kind of overshadow a lot of the transfer decisions that happen, like a Leao coming, opposed to, maybe buying Zubamendi and then trying to throw whatever else you have together for Nico Williams, something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because there's a what if, and you never know what's going to happen, because if Dembele had renewed the way that Xavi would have wanted, now it's interesting because he's playing on the left wing for PSG. And my question would have been that hypothetical, right? That Joao Felix doesn't come, and it's Dembele on the left, probably Ferran Torres behind him, and then it's Lamine Yamal and Rafinha on the right side. Maybe, right? Like, does Lamine Yamal have now? He's been given too many minutes and too much space to grow, but he has been so good in every minute. I saw now it's a little leading here, but as a Barcelona fan and as the Barcelona podcast, we're safe to talk about this here. But I saw a side-by-side statistical comparison between Lamine Yamal and Marcus Rashford. And just based on per 90s, Lamine Yamal has been better than Marcus Rashford this season, which going into last season when Manchester United did what they did to Barcelona, and Rashford, I heard 100 million euros, right? And for Lamine Yamal to be outplaying Marcus Rashford in the minutes that he has been on the field this year, that's not good necessarily for Manchester United, but for Barcelona, they know they have the guy. They know they have the guy moving forward. So I do wonder if, maybe it would have been a perfect scenario. Like maybe Xavi would have had it. Like he would have given Lamine Yamal the perfect 600 and 900 minutes that I would.
Right.
Opposed to the, again, 2,600 that he's probably going to play, unfortunately. That's worrisome. That's just worrisome stuff. But it's hard to play those what ifs and all that stuff. Now, another what if that I'm not really playing is Ronald Araujo not staying at Barcelona. That's not really a what if. I don't expect him to be sold. Apparently, his agent met with the club this week to discuss the renewal. So they're going in that direction as opposed to Bayern Munich. And Araujo, this is an interesting thing because I don't know if they are negotiating from a place of strength, to be honest, due to his form this season and his number of injuries that he's already accrued in his career. But yet Barca also know how important he is, how he's a captain of the future, how much of a leader he is. And I think he and an agent know that. So I don't know. It's an odd thing that I think the number might fit everybody, if that makes sense. Because, again, Barcelona can come to the table and say, we've conceded 33 goals this season in 24 matches. The second worst so far in the 21st century. The only worst season was 2000-2001, having conceded 34 goals in the same amount of time. And I can tell you that season was not a good season. That was not a good season. There were bad times in that season. And that was the last time his defense has been that bad. So I do wonder how this negotiation is going to go, because I think both parties want him to stay. And I wonder I wonder if there will be any roadblocks along the way.
I doubt it. From everything I know about Ronald Araujo, I doubt him ever wanting to leave. Obviously if the club falls apart or something, whatever, but he is like La Masia through and through, just like Gavi, that kind of mold I see him as. So
but Rob, you're falling for the propaganda. He came to Barca B. It gets in my craw too when he arrived from Uruguay. Boston River deserves the credit. They're the ones who created him. But yeah, to your point, he did spend 2 years in for Barca B when he's not with the first team. So for all intents and purposes, he is he is raised by the mythos of La Masia, sure.
Right. And it's not even being bred in La Masia. It's just the way he clearly plays. Whatever. Yeah, I am falling for I'm drinking the Kool-Aid right now. But I'm not worried about him. And if we're selling a center back, I really hope to God it's not ever gonna be him.
Well, yeah, I've talked about it in weeks past. It's Koundé. Maybe Christensen has made himself available. We also don't know who's going to push for it, right? It's about the agents. Right. I just had a Koundé's number. I think Koundé would likely want to stay around for the next manager, and if the next manager chooses him to be the center back with Araujo and say, all right, well, Kubarsi and then Christensen, I guess you're the one who next January they would want to ship out, and I don't love you because managers pick their favorites. That's how it goes. Right. Speaking of managers, let's get into manager talk here, because
Okay.
it seems like every week we're just going to be profiling and highlighting a new candidate. And this week it looks to be Thomas Tuchel. But before we do Thomas Tuchel, I will say it is crazy how Gerard Romero, who does come up on the show occasionally, it's crazy to me with his line about the three candidates for manager, one being Italian, one being German, one being Spanish. That's what he said. And I'm not blaming Romero, by the way. Like, I've said it before in this podcast, and I like to flip the hood up a little bit. My inability to make clickbaity headlines for 6 or 7 years has cost me a lot of money and limited my reach here. But it's why the people who are listening, and the people watch me. Sure. So I don't blame Romero for saying the thing that he knows is going to get clicks and the thing that is vague enough to get the job done. But watch how easy this is. I'm going to do a different version of this. Rob, I have sources that Barca is banking on having 3 players guide their project moving forward. One is from the academy, one is a current captain, and one is a new player that Barcelona have had their eye on for 2 or 3 seasons now. You see how easy that is? You're probably wondering who I'm talking about now. Can you guess what I'm talking about?
Well, we've got Pedri.
No,
Araujo,
I'm not talking about
Pedri or
I just made it up. On the spot.
Oh, okay.
I just made it up. I'm not talking about anybody. That's my point.
Yeah.
See, right?
Right.
Romeo says that, and one being Italian, we know that he's saying, "Oh, De Zerbi, duh." One being German, is that Flick? It's probably Flick. I mean, could it be Tuchel? Sure. And then one being Spanish, and there's been a number of managers. Allen from Sporting CP is the latest one to be mentioned. But again, the reason we talk about Thomas Tuchel this week is because Hansi Flick seems to be the favorite. As I said last week, that he's available, which makes him the favorite. If he wants to come, then sure. But he could also replace Thomas Tuchel at Bayern Munich, meaning the musical chairs might place Tuchel as the man available for Barcelona. And now you and I talked about this before air a little bit. So unfortunately, we agree, which is not fun for podcasting, but I think we agree for the good reasons. Thomas Tuchel, if you watch that Bayern versus Lazio match yesterday, it's a big yikes. Crazy to think also that for Thomas Tuchel, he has been in the last 10 years at Dortmund, PSG, Chelsea, and Bayern Munich, won a Champions League at Chelsea, which sounds like a fantastic resume, but is also a little bit of a red flag because that's a lot of stops in 10 years. So here's a positive. He's worked with Gundogan before at Dortmund, and like Lewandowski, we've seen Gundogan hit double-digit figures in assists for the first time in his career. Great. But the downside of Tuchel is that he has had a broken relationship with every club hierarchy of all the teams that I mentioned, and that included players too. And from a man-manager perspective, I don't see how that is an upgrade from Xavi. Now, as a tactical sense, he is known as for being really pragmatic in his approach to games. And this approach is largely what led him to that Champions League trophy with Chelsea. But in those wins over Real Madrid and Man City, it is hard to say that Chelsea were the better team. But you know what? Hey, he got the results. And with Real Madrid potentially bringing in Kylian Mbappe and all the talent that they have and the money that they still have to spend, and in comparison to Barcelona's squad for the next few seasons, of all the problems we just talked about, Barcelona might need a pragmatic manager that can just get results in the Liga and get a result in El Clasico, because if you're just doing it on talent and those different team sheets, Barcelona aren't winning El Clasico potentially in the next few seasons. That's a cynical approach to it, but that might be reality. And he has been it's tough because he's been at the most talked about clubs. I feel like we're all so familiar with him without actually being really familiar with him at all, because you asked me what his tactics are, and it's been different in every stop. At Chelsea, he was praised for moving to 3 at the back, and for Bayern Munich, that has not worked. And it's hard to say even at Bayern what his project is at all. We've seen them not even struggle. Like they're having a great season, but Bayer Leverkusen is outclassing them. And especially, again, it seems like I only watch them, that being Bayern Munich this season, when they struggle. So I can tell you what's going wrong, but I'm having a hard time telling you what's going right, because when I don't watch them, they just get the win and they're putting up a lot of points. You know, as I said, he could be exactly what Barcelona needs. But from day one, you think that the Barca bigwigs are going to be cool with a guy who may want to get away from playing the way that Barcelona expected to play. And I do say that almost tongue in cheek, like whatever the hell that means, whatever the point of, honestly, how they want to play, whatever that means. But will the Barcelona board be happy with someone who I think will purposely, not in a Jose Mourinho kind of way, but purposely not cater to the dogma of FC Barcelona in words and actions? You really just have to buy in and with words and actions support the dogma, because I say from day one, good freaking luck with that relationship. But again, the irony might be, Rob, that this might be, as in Thomas Tuchel and that kind of a guy that's just different, that might be exactly what this group of players need, because whatever Xavi has been doing for the last few months isn't working. But if Laporta and Deco are not supporting their manager the way I don't think Tuchel will be supported, it's going to be a problem from day one.
Yeah. Yep. I like Barcelona have enough struggles with Xavi as the manager, with him being, given full confidence, and Laporta doing the transfer deals that he wants done. Looking at you, Joao Felix, it's if they aren't trusting Xavi and putting everything into Xavi, why in the world would they do it to Tuchel, who, like you said, has had so many problems at 47 different clubs in the past 2 years? It's just fantasy football to me. I don't understand why I was scared you were going to ask me about tactics from Tuchel, because I don't know anything about the way he plays realistically, because he tries different things and it hasn't been seemingly working for him, except for, one game for Chelsea. It's been more than that, but I just don't see him as a good solution for all, but except, like you said, the team. Like he might be good to step away from the board and just have him be fully and utterly in charge of these players. I think the players could see him like that if he can direct it correctly a certain way. Good luck doing it, but if he can take charge in a way and distract the players from the board and whatever they're saying, it could be special. It could be good to separate them from whatever Barcelona wants them to play like, the board or Laporta, whatever they're supposed to do. Tuchel might be the guy to do that, but again, I don't know if he could. I don't know.
Well, I would also be skeptical tactics wise of looking how Kimmich has not really been, yes, he's had a few injuries this season, but you'd expect that under Thomas Tuchel, or whoever it is that comes into Bayern Munich, if Kimmich is not one of your top 1, 2, 3 players, then you might not be necessarily thriving and clicking on all cylinders. And Kimmich has not really worked under Thomas Tuchel. It has not been, as good as it can be. And, bringing this full circle now with today's show, Frenkie de Jong is to Barcelona what Kimmich needs to be to Bayern Munich in terms of the control and being the metronome for what your team is. Again, if Frenkie de Jong is the best player on the field, then Barcelona probably won that game, or at least they were the team on the front foot. And Bayern Munich is the same thing. When I come away and I go, wow, Kimmich dominated that game, that means Bayern Munich probably won the game. That's generally how it works, because Bayern Munich and Barcelona do operate in that same way, where when they win games, it's because they were the better side and they overran their opponent. They probably had more possession and they created good chances and they finished those chances. And I know that sounds really reductive because, yeah, of course, if any team does that, sure. But the possession part of it and the chance creation is so important, where, again, we watch Real Madrid and that's not necessarily how they play. That's not how it works with Real Madrid. They get results, whether they're coming on the counter or whether they are on the front foot. They get goals at the final minutes. Like, Real Madrid just find ways to win in ways that Bayern Munich and Barcelona, they will have to say they have to deserve to win a lot of the time. And I know, again, that seems to be it seems to be very reductive and kind of shortening the real ideas. But you get the point that for Barcelona, who they're looking for in a manager is someone that is going to be given the impossible task of being under the thumb of Laporta and Deco, while not being able to make their own decisions, while also having to, again, support the dogma of Barcelona and doing it the way that the board and Laporta want, but also changing things up enough to get results and to win games. And that is really, really tough to ask of anybody. So I don't know who that man would be or will be, but the only pushback I will have, and maybe this is wrong, but is Laporta at a place, and we don't know the man. I mean, he is, again, a businessman, and he has been in charge of this club and around this club and knows this club better than any of us do. But this manager pick does feel like a referendum on his, next term. If he doesn't get this right, will the socios turn on him? And I think that is very possible. Like, again, if Barcelona, I don't think they're going to fall out of the top 4 with Xavi, but they're going to have to fight for it. But, it depends on the Champions League too. But we already know Xavi is going to be the scapegoat for this. But I think with a non-Xavi manager, because Xavi represents the club, the next manager will not be like an FC Barcelona guy, if that makes sense. So he's going to have to be, Laporta's stamp of approval. And he'll have to be Laporta having gone on a limb to get that guy. And if he doesn't work out, the next manager, I don't know what that does for Laporta's future, or if he even cares. Like at his age, maybe he might just, he wanted to come back. He wanted to try to guide the club, and maybe he doesn't really push very hard for that second term. Or I don't know. It's hard to vote too because he didn't really bring a plan to the table last time. It was all the good faith from the years before. And I don't even know if after one term, the good vibes from before have worn off yet. I don't know. Like, I know it's a hard question for you because you might not necessarily be old enough to remember the first era the way I did. But like,
Right.
I don't know. There's a lot of questions about Laporta's future that might be tied to the manager. But also, as I said, I make the counter argument to myself. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think this, I don't think this is a very difficult promotion position for Laporta to be in, because I don't think there is a great solution or an easy solution for this manager position.
No.
Maybe if Nagelsmann throws up gets fired after the first game for the Euros this summer or something, and somehow he can finagle that. I don't think it's an easy choice for him, whatever he goes with. And I for that reason, I don't think he would even, like, I know he's attracted to big names. He's made that decision. I think that's why we're hearing so much about Leao, but I don't think he would take such a risk on Tuchel, which would actually, he's in a tough spot. And I didn't think about it until when you brought it up, Dan, but I definitely think this could reflect very poorly on him. And I don't know what the club or the socios would be risking by trying to vote him out, because if they're trying to get a change, right, why not change this guy who, has oversaw this mess? He came to solve it. He didn't really, in a lot of people's eyes. It's just a messy situation altogether, and I don't envy him.
It's very similar to what the argument was with keeping Xavi for this season, throughout at least the rest of this season, because you say, well, who's the better guy? And I say that same thing like over and over again with different things where,
Sure.
Again, going back to the argument that is made, on the bottom of your comment sections on YouTube and the bottom of my comment sections or in Twitter, that whenever people say, and again, this is usually people with just fast thumbs saying, get this player, get this guy out of my club, Xavi out in the second week of August or whatever, like season, whatever, or get this player out, get him out. All right. And they don't want to have the conversation about Frenkie de Jong's finances and this fact that for a lot of these contracts, the player choices, even that, they don't want to have that. But I say, hey, if Frenkie de Jong does want to go, then you tell me the player that is going to replace him. If you want the manager out, give me a realistic manager with the number that Barca can actually afford to pay their manager. Right. When we even talk about Thomas Tuchel, he would have to make half of what he made at Bayern Munich. And again, that's him being released. So these guys want to stay in these jobs, and said the allure of coming to Barcelona is high. But a lot of these managers, De Zerbi included, will have to basically take a lateral financial move or even lower it to arrive at FC Barcelona. And so that is a commitment that these new guys would make to the club. And I think they would say, all right, if I'm taking a pay cut to come to Barcelona, you got to give me a year. You know what I mean? Like you can't cut me loose in February because, let's say next season goes exactly the way this season has, or worse. You can't cut me loose in February because I need at least a year if I'm taking a pay cut to come to Barcelona. So yeah, I mean, I have not heard a name yet because I don't think there is one that exists. I mean, because even Garcia Pimienta has distanced himself now from this job because, as I've said before, I think if a new president were to come in the next term, then Garcia Pimienta to me would be the favorite at that point, but not at this point under Laporta, the guy who let him loose in 2021, because he would just let him loose again. I mean, there's also a part in my gut that says if this musical chairs stops and everyone has another spot and Barcelona still don't have a manager, then Rafa Marquez is going to be the guy. And I don't think he's the right guy for the job.
No. Yeah, I haven't watched much of Barcelona Athletic, but I from everything I've read, I don't think a lot of people think he's the guy.
Well, I think there's a big difference between the first team and the third team. I think he's not ready. Like watching him as a manager with Barca Athletic, I think his in-game substitutions, different experiments that he's tried have not worked. Playing either Casado or Moya as the right back and then inverting. Like every time I watch Barca Athletic, like his job is to, again, give Marc Bernal some time and give these teenagers, the next teenagers, basically, like give the next teenagers a little bit of time, give them some experience and get some positive results, which he has, and they're fine, right? But I do not see the experience needed from Rafa Marquez at this point to make the step forward. because like even if he got them promoted or something, like I need to see him over amount of time make these players better. I do need to see him almost build a project with Barca Athletic before I can believe he can build something with the first team. And there hasn't been enough time to do that. And all indications in the club are that he's fine and he's not really doing that, but he does have the support of Deco and Laporta. And again, it's with Barcelona. With the research, as we'll tease this now. We don't know exactly when it's going to come out, but we can let people know and tease the collaboration that we're working on, that it is a deep dive history on a lot of different stuff. So how much, Rob, would you like to reveal about what we're working
on? Well, it's going to be one of the best resources to learn about the history of FC Barcelona on the internet, I would say, in a nice, comfortable, you can sit down and watch it instead of having to go through 18 different web pages. It's going to be a very convenient and nice way to learn about FC Barcelona.
Yeah, I will be putting both our videos, because that'll be something coming out from each of our channels. So subscribe to both of those. And we'll both have a video out, and I'll put both of them in my History of FC Barcelona playlist. So you could just go through. And I think someday, Rob, I need to put those in chronological order, because it is a little bit of whiplash to go from 2006 to 1912 to 1992. And it gets tough. It gets tough. Anyway. In the meantime, though, before our stuff is out, where can people find your work so that we don't miss that stuff when it comes out?
You could subscribe to me on YouTube at Robby Lou. I'm also on Twitter at Bobbly Lou. But I'm actually making a video right now. It should be up by the time this goes up, on Ilkay Gundogan and the transformation he's had at Barcelona. It's really impressive, especially when you look at the numbers, the creativity of this guy. It's unparalleled, not only in football right now, but in his career.
Nice. Yeah, like I've said before, we're very much like Lamine Yamal, but on the opposite direction of age, that I think Gundogan is playing too much, and I would like to see him rested a little bit, because again, his per 90, and when he seems like he's fit, he's been the guy that Barcelona signed at the number he was signed at, and he's been a good signing. I agree. So I'm looking forward to your video. Again, it'll probably be out by the time I get this out, because I like to take my time a little bit. So you can find him on Twitter, as I mentioned, and you can find me and us on Twitter and Instagram at the Barcelona Pod. So I am like 20 people away from 2,000 on X. So as I've said before that website completely explodes, I would love it if you get me to 2,000, so I could go down with the ship at 2,000 on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And then Patreon, closed Facebook group, the merch store. Those are all the ways to help me out. But again, the easiest way and the freest way is to give a good rating on the podcast apps, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's always a big help. And most importantly, though, thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Support the Barca.